I'm a teacher. I'm a music teacher. I was teaching in schools. I was always interested in music from far places in the world. I grew up in Cleveland, and at that time and place, there was what was referred to as ethnic radio. And every hour, there was a different radio program dedicated to communities. And so, particularly on the weekends, we'd go from the Metropolitan Opera to the Polish Hour, to the German Hour, the Slovenian Hour, the Hungarian Hour, a lot of Eastern European, kind of thing, because that was, a good chunk of the communities at the time. And so I was interested in that, the radio, and so by way of that, became interested also in the people who made the music. And as I grew and stayed there for a while longer, I wound up going to Ohio University, then coming back to Kent State University, where there was an ethnomusicology program evolving at an earlier time with Halim Eldab and Terry Miller. And so that was the manner in which I could take ideas that were coming into the ears from earlier on into some kind of study of practice, and also an extension to more of the world. Yeah. I went to graduate school at Kent State University because that was a good teaching college. I was also teaching at that time in a middle school, a high school, an elementary school on the east side and southeast side of Cleveland, so Kent was within distance. And I didn't want to give up the teaching, so there were courses in the late afternoons and evenings that I could get to, and they were courses in music education. And I went into the PhD with the firm purpose of becoming a music teacher educator. But on the way, I discovered ethnomusicology, and I really hadn't known very much about it, but I began to play in the Thai ensemble. I studied with a South Indian Carnatic singer and drummer because they had a visiting artist program happening, and I wound up, just in courses. My cognates then became ethnomusicology. Yeah. Right, well, my research has been with children on the manner in which children learn music, acquire music, play with music. My dissertation was on the look at two instructional approaches to the teaching of, I suppose for lack of a better word, but we used to use it at the time, an appreciation of an unfamiliar culture. And that unfamiliar culture was gamelan. So with all of the instruments we could find in one group of young students, 11, 12-year-olds, we had a ton of xylophones. And in another group, we had a ton of AV. And while it was, to me, somewhat predictable that the kids would enjoy and perhaps be energized by the playing of the music, we felt that it was important to go through, the process, and we found out that, in fact, they learned musical concepts rather equally, and so the question was partly, was the test even appropriate? But in terms of their enthusiasm and their preference for this music, and that was behaviorally determined through listening and selection, as well as self-report. They were way off and excited because they had played the music versus watching films and having little discussion groups and listening. Yeah. So that was my very earliest research, and clearly it was kind of a psychometric sort because that's what educators would do at the time. But I'd become interested in what do children naturally do, and so was involved in a project called Songs in Their Heads, and so we pulled together, just a whole set of observations and conversations with children about what music means to them, and why, in fact, they are drawn to the kinds of music that really do give them solace, give them energy, give them reason to want to participate in the music. So that's been an ongoing interest, and many of our doctoral students are studying, music in children's lives as a result of, that project. And then, of course, there's the ongoing work in pedagogy, and so we're developing World Music Pedagogy as a listening into an active performance, into creating music, into what does this music mean, getting to some of the ethnomusicological principles we think in working with students of various experiences and ages, all the way into the university student. First come into world music understandings. Yeah. Well, yeah, for me it was very exciting to be brought into the University of Washington. I knew it was a music education position, and I've been there, this is my 31st year there. I had taught at two other universities, Butler University and Washington University in St. Louis, which was my first university position, and then I'd also taught in school, so I've had a long life of it. But getting the call from Dan Newman that we want you was very exciting. And Chris Waterman was there, and Tara Ellingson, and Lorraine Cicada, so there was that group. And so I knew that I would be in music education, but working into ethnomusicology, and over time it became even more so. So that was an exciting moment. It's been exciting to work with children, to work with teachers. We've developed this World Music Pedagogy thing. When Dan Sheehy invited me to the board of Smithsonian Folkways, that was another exciting thing. I was driving along to a high school music class over to make an observation of a student teacher, and I get this call, and he'd asked me to come onto the board. Wow, well, this is great. I need to know these recordings. So I started listening, and I started thinking, these are really good. Let's see what we could do. If indeed so much of this music is oral tradition, can we evolve a pedagogy in which we don't need any notation, that we can select the music carefully, but really allow learners to come into the music all the way to a confidence and skill in being able to perform it only by listening. So that's been an exciting time, and it was really, it was really coming into Smithsonian Folkways that was lovely. I've served on various boards. It's been wonderful to be a part of the ISME, which is associated with ICTM, but it's the International Society for Music Education, and that has really formed networks for me of teachers and teacher educators all across the world, interested in diversity, interested in internationalizing and interculturalizing, and so we've done a lot of that. Another highlight was a run-in with a graduate student out in Seattle who eventually became professor at University of Dar es Salaam and came from a small village in central Tanzania. And now I've had 7 visits there, and he comes over to Seattle as a visiting artist, and we're working with the idea of festival as education and the sustainability of certain musical traditions that were actually going on the wane and disappearing, except for the fact that this festival brought people with pride of heritage again. And so that's been just a marvel, just has moved my ear and my ideas, sideways in wonderful ways. So those are some of the highlights, I suppose. Yeah. Oh my, yeah. I mean, we are teaching in a 19th century mode. We continue to drag back into what music was in higher education 120 years ago. It's critical. Ethnomusicology has moved schools of music forward, and we have receded too. Ethnomusicology has brought, I think, to K-12 teachers, some understanding. And of course we know that the K-6, K-8 teachers are much more open to the possibilities of going into diverse musics, because they're not, quote, saddled with, but also dedicated to wonderful choral, band, and orchestral ensembles that are preserving particular kinds of musical traditions too. I think that ethnomusicology, though, has brought to mind that there's more there. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And so the biggest challenge for us is, how do we convince music theorists in university faculties and performers who are dedicated to instruments, that maybe they could move it out just a wee bit more and talk to their ethnomusicology faculty to see if there could be collaborations, if there could be sensitivities brought forward. And again, a very large concern is how do we invite secondary school teachers into this commitment we would seem to all want to have in a diversifying repertoire to some extent, to allowing channels that seem equitable to more kids who don't see themselves in the midst of a wind band. And that's a tough road to hoe. But I think we're making inroads, steps forward, a couple steps back. Ethnomusicology is a means, and a beautiful means of bridging cultures and communities, and that's what we want to see happen, certainly in education, as we go along.